worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within.
Americans are more responsible of handling their own money than the government.
Throughout this entire ordeal, which I think no American should have to go through, the torment of 15 months that my family and I had to endure for something I didn't do. I didn't do anything wrong.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Tonight on America Decides, Vice President Vance takes America first to Munich. He meets with Ukrainian President Zelenskyy as the Trump administration attempts in its own way to end the almost three-year war, the one launched by Russia. Vance also today called on our European allies to, in his words, do more.
But while the Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine, and we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense.
Speaking of more resignations. Manhattan's top prosecutor and several senior Justice Department officials have quit over the order from the Trump Justice Department to end the case against New York City Mayor Eric Adams. That's a corruption case. Adams is assisting his attorneys, did not offer the Trump administration anything like a quid pro quo.
Imagine him going inside saying that the only way Mayor Adams is going to assist in immigration, which I was calling for since 2022, is if you drop the charges. That's quid pro quo. That's a crime.
I want to begin with Elizabeth Palmer in Munich and Eleanor Watson at the Pentagon. Liz, it's great to see you. Lots of things were discussed today. Much on the minds of Europeans is what the Trump administration directionally is suggesting about a settlement between Russia and Ukraine. What's your biggest takeaway?
Gee, the tea leaves were hard to read. We got almost nothing from after the meeting between Zelenskyy, the Secretary of State, and the vice president. The vice president did say that he wanted to avoid a return to war in a settlement with Russia, or a return to war in a couple of years down the road in Eastern Europe. And to tell you the truth, Europeans and Ukrainians fear that that's code for let's offer Russia lots of concessions in return for a promise that Russia won't invade in the next the rest of the decade. But as Zelenskyy has made very clear, he doesn't think that Russia's promises are worth the paper they're written on. So we're still pretty much in the dark about that and about what role Ukraine is going to have in negotiating its own, we hope, peace.
Eleanor, I want to turn to you because there was a question posed at a Politico event to Roger Wicker, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, about comments made about a day or so ago from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, basically saying that Ukraine getting into NATO, unrealistic, retaining or recouping territory lost to Russia 2014 in Crimea, also unrealistic. Let's listen to that soundbite.
People in the administration know you don't say before your first meeting what you will agree to and what you won't agree to.
Yeah, I was puzzled by that, too.
Yeah, well, I was puzzled, too, and I was disturbed. I was disturbed by it.
That's worth noting for the defense secretary from Roger Wicker, someone who worked very hard to see Pete Hegseth would get through that confirmation process, which he did, albeit narrowly. What's been the general sense there at the Pentagon, Eleanor?
Yeah, so those comments a few days ago, Secretary Hegseth was pretty harsh in delivering them, saying that it was unrealistic for Ukraine to expect its pre-2014 borders, a return to the borders before Russia invaded the first time, and for a spot in NATO. He has since, while on this trip in Europe, walked those comments back slightly. He said everything is on the table. What he says doesn't rule things out about what President Trump might put on the table. He did, however, double down on the realism of that, of it's unlikely that NATO would accept Ukraine. It's unlikely that Ukraine would gain its pre-2014 borders. And by injecting the realism, he's still kind of presenting potential concessions that Ukraine would have to make, and we're still not hearing what, if anything, Russia might have to guarantee to Ukraine.
Liz, I want to play for you something that you alluded to a moment ago, the exact words of the vice president about something that would, to the administration's satisfaction, be durable in terms of a peace between Russia and Ukraine. Let's listen to that.
Fundamentally, the goal is, as President Trump outlined it, we want the war to come to a close. We want the killing to stop, but we want to achieve a durable, lasting peace, not the kind of peace that's going to have Eastern Europe in conflict just a couple years down the road.
Liz, to the degree you've been able to factor this in Munich, what's been the reaction to the overall approach of the Trump administration, and is there any leeriness that directionally the Trump administration is signaling, if not sympathy toward Russia, a kind of willingness to hear them out in any negotiated settlement?
Yes, I think that's the suspicion of most European government officials. And I think it's amplified by the fact that Russia said a couple of days ago, oh, yeah, we will, of course, talk to the Ukrainians, but the main pipeline for this, the hammering out of the brass tacks, is going to be directly between Washington and the Kremlin. And European leaders feel that President Trump is just entirely too sympathetic to Vladimir Putin.
Eleanor, from the Pentagon, what else has been the orientation to this big question? Ukraine, Russia, potential settlement.
So what is still on the table, we've talked a lot about what is potentially off the table. What is still on the table, at least for now, is aid to Ukraine. For all of the criticism the Trump administration has given the Biden administration for promising billions of dollars in aid to Ukraine, the Trump administration so far has not stopped that flow. It takes months from the point the commitment is made for that aid to get into Ukraine. So even commitments the Biden administration made in December, those weapons are still flowing. And so what card that Trump could play going forward is either condition that aid on a Ukrainian deal for access to rare minerals in Ukraine, or continue that aid without condition as maybe some potential leverage over Putin. We didn't get a clear answer on where that rare minerals deal landed today, but that's a possibility in the future.
A key point. Thank you for raising that. Eleanor Watson, and our thanks to Liz Palmer in Munich. This evening, as we speak, criminal charges against New York City Mayor Eric Adams still stand. They're still on the books. That may change. But what we do know is the number of resignations over the Trump Justice Department order to drop that corruption case, which hasn't yet been dropped, as I just said, continue to rise. The number now stands at 7. 7 resignations, which includes Manhattan's top prosecutor and several senior Department of Justice officials. CBS News Justice Department reporter Jake Rosen joins me here at the desk. So, Jake, in your own words, this case is still, for the moment, it may change sometime tonight, it may change over the weekend, I don't know, on the books.
Right, and from the point that we saw acting head of the deputy head of the DOJ, Emil Bove, write this letter on behalf of the Justice Department to SDNY prosecutors, telling them to drop the case earlier this week. There has not been an actual order to do that. That has not actually happened yet. So right now it's just been signaling from the Trump administration that we have plans to do this. Mayor Adams has acknowledged it. His attorneys have acknowledged it. The DOJ has acknowledged it. However, they have not been able to find a prosecutor in the SDNY, given the resignations that happened yesterday as a result of all of this, or anyone so far today to officially go and do that, at least as of the time we're talking.
And that's an important procedural mechanism. Somebody representing the Justice Department has to go before a judge and say, this case is being dropped. Correct?
Yes, and Donald Trump, despite, and his administration, despite the clear conversations that happened over the last couple of weeks between Mayor Adams' team of attorneys and the Department of Justice to drop this case, there cannot be an executive order, as Donald Trump has done on so many things so far in his presidency, to just drop these cases. Again, a career attorney has to go do that, has to put their name on the dotted line to say that even though there's been allegations of a quid pro quo, there's been allegations of political favoritism, obviously, with the lawsuit that the Department of Justice filed 2 days ago against the state of New York over immigration. Mayor Adams conveniently left out of that, as we know. So obviously, someone has to put their name on the dotted line and be held accountable for whatever happens after this.
Does a judge have any discretion once that process is put forward?
A judge can temporarily hold this up, but they are very limited in power. The judge in the Southern District of New York will be very limited to what he can actually do to stop this.
And it's worth reminding the audience that when this order was given, it was said in the order that this is not based on the facts of the case or the law.
Right? Not at all. This was based on Mayor Adams' ability to help the Trump administration with their immigration program, with the deportations and ICE work that they want done across the city. It's also done because they believe that this was a weaponized prosecution. The Trump administration turning the word weaponization kind of on its head and using what they see as a deal with Mayor Adams, at least through November, to get his security clearance back, to free him up from this political chaos, from the news in New York, from the his potential run for re-election in the fall, to clear the way for him to help them to be an ally in this fight. As again, I just mentioned, they see the rest of the state of New York as in the way of that, especially when it comes to enforcing immigration.
Jake Rosen, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Elon Musk and his so-called war on waste. That's about federal government waste. We're joined by Congressman and DOJ subcommittee member Tim Burchett. That coming up next. You're watching America Decides. This afternoon, federal judge Tanya Chutkan, that's a name that might ring a bell if you remember the legal exertions of special counsel Jack Smith. Well, she held a preliminary hearing on the constitutional limits, if there are any, on Elon Musk's efforts to run, manage, and enforce the decisions of the Department of Government Efficiency. I want to bring in Tennessee Republican Congressman Tim Burchett. He serves on the newly formed House Department of Government Efficiency Subcommittee. Congressman, I'll get into DOJ in a second, but first, if with your permission, I'd like to ask you a broader philosophical question. If the Almanac of American Politics is correct, when you were mayor of Knox County, you said you were a limited libertarian. Today, as we talk now, do you consider yourself more or less of a libertarian than you did back then?
Probably more. I see that we need more of it, less government involvement in our life and more personal responsibility. I think that's something we should all try to attain.
And how does that influence the way you are deciding how good a job Elon Musk and DOJ are off to?
Well, I think they're doing an excellent job, actually. They're exposing a lot of horrible things. You know, who'd have thought that we were sending $16 billion to terrorist organizations. And I have a bill right now currently to defund the Taliban, who are sending about 40, that we know of, about 40 million a week. I just think Americans, that money should be in their pockets, or it should be expended on Americans that are in need. Case in point, the people in Upper East Tennessee and Western North Carolina who were hit by Hurricane Helene. You know, we voted for $100 million under the previous administration for them. And I didn't vote for it because I knew probably the money would be misdirected or, in fact, stolen. And, in fact, I felt like it was $54 million to house illegals with FEMA money in New York. So I think, case in point, Americans are more responsible of handling their own money than the government.
Do you want Elon Musk and his associates to cancel payments from the federal government, or would you prefer President Trump send a list of things that he believes are either wasteful or misdirected to Congress, and then have Congress kill that funding through an appropriations process, or maybe the process by which you have to fund the rest of the government come middle of next month?
I'm in favor of more of a hybrid type situation. I'm just going to be honest with you. I think that Elon Musk and the DOJ group and President Trump probably have about 100 to 150 days before Congress loses its guts. Because I'm afraid what's going to happen is you're going to see that some of this money is flowing back to Congress members, either through family members, wife and or girlfriend that maybe works at one of these organizations or one of the companies or endless corporations that are attached to it. So I think we're going to have a limited time. I want them to get as many out as possible, and I want them to get on to the Department of Education and to the Pentagon, because I believe you're going to see a lot more misdirected funds there, and it goes much deeper.
So if I hear you correctly, Congressman, what you're afraid of is 100 days from now, maybe 150 at most, Republicans and Democrats are going to go wobbly and not back any of this, or not back nearly enough to please you.
Yes, sir. I think what will happen is you'll see, and I used to be called a conspiracy theorist, and now I'm just called a realist. I think you'll see the Republicans, the House will put forth a measure that's very conservative, and the Democrats will put one out equally as conservative, but they will not align. And the people in charge will know that, and then you'll just see again, it'll just run aground. So I think right now, and Congress has to have the guts to back up what the president does. Any executive order the next president can undo, but it's a little tougher when Congress puts it in action. I think we need a clear plan to start doing that.
And real quickly, just yes or no, 2,000 people removed from Energy Department. You okay with that?
If they're not doing their job, what it's designed to do, I suspect, like most government departments, though, they're very bloated. I have met with a guy this morning who said, he showed them how to save money, and he did at his place. And then as soon as he left, they brought the people right back in, and they're not saving any money. So, yeah.
How about 1,000 from the Veterans Administration?
If they're not doing their job, the trouble you have with the VA is that veterans ought to be able to go to any hospital or doctor in the country. Just bring a card and say, "Here's my DD-214, an honorable discharge," and they ought to be able to receive the top medical care in the country. Currently, though, they're bused to VA hospitals in places, and some of them we're pretty fortunate here in Tennessee, but some of the VA treatment centers and hospitals, I understand, are not doing their job. So if they make it more efficient, they get rid of a bureaucrat, I'm all for it.
How about 3,400 from the Forest Service?
I would support that as well if they're not doing their job. If these people are out in the forest doing their job, they're preventing wildfires, the ones that ravage California, then I'd say we need to keep them. But again, you're looking at these programs that have been bloated for years, and everybody, and that's the power in government, is employment. You start employing people, and currently a lot of the federal government are no-show jobs, and that's where we're running. The mayor of Washington, D.C., as liberal as she is, she's a very kind lady, but she petitioned President Biden to send people back to work because downtown Washington was dying. The only people making any money were the people selling weed.
Understood. There are now 7,500 who have signed up for the president's buyout offer at the end of this fiscal year. When that bill comes before Congress, will you vote to provide the money to pay out that early retirement program?
Yes, sir. I did that when I was mayor of Knox County, and we reduced the unbelievable amount of about over $40 million in debt. Of course, now that doesn't look like anything. We spent more than that since I took my last breath in the federal government. But in Knox County and in Tennessee, $40 million is still a lot of money to save. And yes, it is a cost-saving method, and it will. I think it's a wise decision. It's what businesses do. We talk about business-like principles, and that's exactly what President Trump is doing.
Congressman Tim Burchett, thank you, sir.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Vice President Vance, fair to say he did not mince any words while addressing global leaders at the Munich Security Conference. More on his speech and how it was received. That's next. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. While addressing the Munich Security Conference, Vice President Vance, in sort of veiled language, maybe not so veiled, accused European countries of exercising some manner of censorship. It's an important point. Let's take a listen.
In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat. So I come here today not just with an observation, but with an offer. And just as the Biden administration seemed desperate to silence people for speaking their minds, so the Trump administration will do precisely the opposite, and I hope that we can work together on that.
I want to bring in our reporter panel. Tom LoBianco is the founder and national politics reporter for 24 Site News. Stephanie Lai is White House correspondent for Bloomberg. Stephanie joins us from Munich. Tom is right here with me at the table. Stephanie, I want to start with you. That reference to censorship, how did that land with the Europeans who were there to listen to the vice president?
Well, the room was packed, but it didn't seem like many of the applause lines in his speech garnered much response from the people in the audience. There were a couple of chuckles here and there, but for the most part, it seemed like the crowd was quite stiff when he was speaking. Now, part of that is because the speech was essentially Vice President J.D. Vance's chance to assail leaders at the Munich Security Conference in his address that really threatened to inflame the growing rifts between the U.S. and Europe. And it really failed to quell the concerns among European allies that were already rankled from President Donald Trump's remarks earlier this week about the handling of the war in Ukraine and some of his comments on tariffs.
And Stephanie, as I read the speech and looked over it, it appeared that the vice president was saying, look, you have in these various European countries a rising sentiment among some of your people that are with hard right political instincts. That's troublesome in Germany. It's possibly troublesome in other European countries. And what Vance was saying, if I heard it correctly, was you better heed these voters, because if you continue to ignore or push them aside, they're going to grow stronger. Is that the way the room heard it?
It does seem like that was how it was received. And in fact, he also had a similar sentiment at the AI summit in Paris when he said that AI technology had been used by some of our foreign allies and adversaries to censor political views. And that was in line with what you had mentioned on this populist, this growing right wing across the world. And I think J.D. Vance's message was very much that, if the U.S. is to get involved, you cannot be continuing to do this sort of thing with your AI technologies and in your policies.
Stand by, Stephanie. Tom, this is the vice president sort of giving voice to a kind of free speech permissiveness. All speech is good, even if it, if not terrifies, rankles those, for example, in Germany who are concerned about the rise of what appear to them to be far-right sentiments.
Yeah, well, take it in context. This comes before the German elections.
Right.
That we're going to have. It mirrors a lot of the language that Elon Musk has used.
Right, and posted on X.
Yeah, and if you look at it, you talk about free speech, okay? And, certainly, we appreciate more than anybody the First Amendment. But in this universe where people are dialed into their phones constantly, where X has in some ways become the official government platform, and certainly in some cases, there's an incredible amount of false news out there. Whatever you term that, it's wrong. All right. Often promoted by one of the most powerful figures in the world right now, Elon Musk.
And Europeans are skeptical of that. They have different rules and regulations about what constitutes hate speech, damaging speech, disinformation. And even one of the things that the vice president talked about is, well, your efforts to control that or police the social media space more aggressively than we do are by definition censorship. That's not the way the Europeans view it.
No, not at all. And it also comes as Germany has asked for data on how Elon Musk is amplifying the false information, because they want to know. He is the most powerful political force at the moment right now. And, we also saw that Vance met with Alice Weidel, the head of the AfD party, extreme right. It has some neo-Nazi stuff in its past. Whether or not that's still the case, it is very extreme right. How you interpret that is very important. And what Vance is saying, whether he means that heed the populace or whether he's using it to amplify and help out the AfD.
Exactly. Heed or amplify. That's a huge question. Stephanie, I want to play for you something that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said in Poland today that I'm certain also attracted quite a bit of attention on the continent. Let's listen.
The American troop levels on the continent are important. What happens 5 or 10 or 15 years from now is part of a larger discussion that reflects the threat level, America's posture, our needs around the globe, but most significantly, the capability of European countries to step up. And that's why our message is so stark to our European allies. Now is the time to invest, because you can't make an assumption that America's presence will last forever.
One thing definitely true about what the defense secretary said, the message was stark. True, Stephanie?
Yes, and this is something that we've been hearing from many members of Trump's administration, not just the defense secretary, but also Vice President J.D. Vance in his remarks this week really emphasized the point that the U.S. is not going to be a partner that can just continue to prop up every single country's defense funds. His main message in his bilateral meetings with many world leaders this week alone has been that Europe has to step up its security guarantees and spending. And so I think this message is very clear in that, immediately there is interest. I think Trump had even said earlier this week that he would be open to more aid to Ukraine. But that interest comes with the caveat that this isn't a guarantee forever.
Not a guarantee forever, and probably in exchange for investment in rare earth minerals in Ukraine or other commodities there of interest to the Trump administration. Tom LoBianco here at the desk. Stephanie Lyon, Munich, thank you very much. Stand by. Later in the show, we'll bring you back for more conversation. Meanwhile, several Justice Department officials have resigned over the Eric Adams case and everything related to it. We'll dig into that legal fight next. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back. President Trump said today he doesn't know very much, if anything at all, about Eric Adams, the New York City mayor's legal controversy. Let's take a listen to that.
I don't know about it. I mean, obviously, I'm not involved in that. But I would say this, that if they had a problem, and these are mostly people from the previous administration, you understand, so they weren't going to be there anyway. They were going to all be gone or dismissed. But I know nothing about the individual case.
Harry Litman joins us now. He's a former U.S. attorney and host of the Talking Feds podcast. Harry, first of all, do you believe what the president said today?
He's mistaken. Well, first of all, it is interesting. I was reminded of a few moments in his first term where he disavowed any knowledge. The Deputy Attorney General and Attorney General are making clear that this comes from his priorities. But in any event, his statement is false, Major. We're talking about career professionals who have resigned, and not just career professionals. We really are talking about the Navy SEALs of the DOJ, the most proud, vaunted unit who prosecute public integrity around the country. And the treatment at the hands of the Attorney General and the acting Deputy Attorney General, I have to say, is the most savage and brutal mistreatment of DOJ professionals in the department's history. It's cataclysmic within the department.
Why is it cataclysmic? Is it because in this order, the Justice Department acknowledged that the order was being given without any analysis of the facts of the case or the law, or is it something even bigger than that?
Well, that is the premise, right? That the Deputy Attorney General, I think very unwisely, said we're not doing this because of facts and law, and that's really the marrow of what the DOJ does. That's of course what it does. But then, in addition, to take it a step further, as the AG spokesperson just has, and essentially call them dishonest, pretextual, acting on politics grounds. It's an Alice in Wonderland kind of discourse that has it exactly wrong. Anybody, I mean anybody of any political stripe who's been in the department knows that that's simply false.
And the people who have resigned, let's just name check two, Danielle Sassoon and Hagen Scotton. These are not people who are or could be even alleged or suggested to either be liberals or progressives. They have fine conservative legal backgrounds, groundings. Not that that should matter, but in case people want to jump to any kind of political conclusion, it doesn't seem from these two at least, Harry, that can be made.
Yeah, so it's more than that, but these two, Major, are really a nightmare out of central casting for the administration. We're talking about a Scalia clerk, a John Roberts clerk. John Roberts can't be happy today, who got two bronze medals for his service in Iraq, who says in his letter, I'm not against the administration generally, but says, this is not how we do it in the Department of Justice. You have to understand. Sassoon said, I'd be glad to discuss it. If not, I may have to resign. And the Deputy Attorney General said, we accept your resignation. They then pull it in to Main Justice and have the entire, what a sort of dramatic image from today. They lock the entire public integrity unit, some 30 lawyers, in a room as if they're truant school children who've shoplifted a pack of lifesavers, and says, you're not coming out until one of you agrees to dismiss the case. This is really incredibly high-handed, disrespectful, brutal, Stalinist, really without any close to precedent in DOJ history.
Harry, for those who are not familiar, the Southern District of New York has a formidable and well-earned reputation for being formidable within the Justice Department. What are the echo effects if it is bullied across the entire country?
Yeah, they are profound, and I think also to the judges in the country. Everyone stands up in the country with pride saying, we're from the Department of Justice, we do prosecutions without fear or favor. And here, they're not only told to do it in a different way, but fired if they don't. And you're right about the SDNY, but some people will say, oh, they are mavericks. The people at Maine Justice, Major, the Public Integrity Section, the Assistant Attorney General, top person for criminal, all of whom were put in by Trump in the last few weeks. Those folks, everyone in the department knows are career, are honest, do it the right way. So it's a terrible brain drain for DOJ, but it's an absolute kick in the gut for how everybody in the DOJ learned to do their job and stand up and make decisions based on facts and law. And here that they're brazen enough to say, yeah, no facts or law problem. Nevertheless, you must do this. And then to insult them as being pretextual and political for not doing it. It is a very dark day. And yes, everyone in the 94 U.S. attorneys' offices today, without regard to their party affiliation, takes this as a kick in the teeth, without a doubt.
Ramifications today, quite possibly ramifications to come. Harry Litman, thank you very much.
Thank you, Major.
The National Transportation Safety Board gave an important update to the public today on its investigation into the deadly midair collision between an Army Black Hawk helicopter and a regional American Airlines passenger jet. That crash killed 67 people. Among the NTSB's findings, the Black Hawk pilot possibly had, quote, bad data. I want to bring in CBS News senior transportation correspondent Chris Van Cleve. Chris, catch us up on what we learned.
Sure. Now, obviously, the investigation is early, so some things may change here, Major, but what has stood out to investigators, in particular with the helicopter, they pointed to a moment about 5 minutes before the collision where one of the pilots reported being at 300 feet. The other said they were at 400 feet. And they noted there was no discussion between the pilots about that altitude disagreement. They want to understand what information the helicopter may have been feeding to those pilots. Is it possible the helicopter was giving them bad data about their altitude? There's some data in the flight recorder that they determined was just not useful, not accurate. So they're trying to understand if those pilots even knew what altitude they were really flying at. The other thing, and this is significant, it appears two key air traffic control messages may have not ever reached the Black Hawk helicopter. In one point, where the controller is telling the helicopter that the regional jet was circling around to a different runway, it appears part of that message, the circling around part, didn't get to the helicopter. It's not recorded on their black box. It's heard in the airplane, not in the helicopter. And then 17 seconds before disaster, air traffic control told the helicopter to pass behind the jet. Well, it appears one of the pilots keyed the radio during that call. 8 seconds of it, including the portion where they said circle around, was lost to the pilots, they think.
So this could be, and again, to your very top point, lots more to learn, lots more to explain, but this could be either data that is in some way garbled or basic fundamental communications that don't make it where they need to land.
I think they're looking at both of those things that may end up being factors here. If the helicopter pilots are given bad data and don't know what altitude they're flying at, they may have thought they were in the exact right place where they were supposed to be. It's also interesting that you had one pilot note they were at 300, the other said 400 on a check ride where one pilot is evaluating the other, and there was no conversation about the apparent altitude disagree. If each of their screens are showing different altitudes, that's significant too, and that's significant in pilot communication. And then there's this issue with, did the message from controllers get to the helicopter pilots? Did they have the necessary information they needed? We understand now from investigators it looks increasingly likely that the pilots of the airliner, Major, made a last-second effort to take an evasive maneuver to avoid a collision. But there is no conversation, no indication at all on board the Black Hawk recorder that those pilots ever saw the plane they flew right into.
Bringing so much of this to light. Thank you very much, Chris Van Cleve. I appreciate it.
Sure thing.
President Trump is taking action to discourage schools across our nation from mandating COVID-19 vaccinations. Our reporter panel, which I promised would return, in fact will return to discuss that and much more. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back. Great to have you with us. President Trump signed an executive order today calling for the withholding of federal funds for schools and universities that impose a COVID-19 vaccine mandate. Tom LoBianco and Stephanie Lai are back with us as part of our reporter panel. Stephanie is in Munich. She's still there. She hasn't taken a flight or a train anywhere else. Tom LoBianco, I won't let him leave the desk, so he's right here with me. Tom, I want to start with you. Okay, does this really mean anything? Is this an executive order to grab headlines or actually do something?
Yeah, there's show horse and workhorse.
Okay, yes, I've heard of that.
This one seems more like a show horse.
Okay, why?
Schools do not mandate this.
Right now?
K-12.
They're not doing it.
No, it's not. Colleges, some still mandate this.
Small number.
15, yeah, something like that.
15,
yeah.
Yeah.
This feels like, now the question next on all these executive orders, because we've seen this with the use of DEI, for instance, what is it about a hammer for something else?
Is it preparatory for something
Yes.
else? Yeah.
Will it be used? Because remember, too, Musk is already getting into the Department of Education to eliminate a lot of funding in there. Whether or not that holds will be a question of the courts,
right?
Obviously. This feels in line with that, concurrent with that. So is this a hammer? It feels more like a hammer right now, not directly effective.
Stephanie, I'm glad Tom mentioned the word hammer, excuse me, because I wonder if there at the Munich Security Conference, in addition to all the other national security foreign policy issues that we discussed earlier, there was this long-running conversation this week with lots of ups and downs about tariffs and whether they will or will not happen. Lots of rhetoric from President Trump about the European Union. If those at the Munich Security Conference perceive that tariff talk as another kind of hammer from the Trump administration.
That's a really interesting question, and I think it'll depend on who you speak to. But I think largely a lot of the European leaders have started to recognize some of Trump's mannerisms, and having dealt with him in the first administration, they understand that there are moments where he might float an idea that ends up being more of a negotiation tactic rather than a solid plan or something that will go into effect immediately. And I think that's what we've been seeing with these reciprocal tariffs that we believe will come into place in April. But of course, all of the timing, the levels, they remain pretty fluid right now. And I think that's one of those signs for European leaders that this is an opportunity for them to go to the negotiation table or to start up conversations to prevent any tariffs from actually getting put in place.
And Stephanie, does it feel like the Trump administration is trying to insert itself into European democratic conversations? We talked about the censorship allegation a moment ago, but also Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth talking about increasing defense budgets. Well, to do that, governments have to do that with the consent of the people in their own country, which has been something that has been problematic over the years. That's got to be part of the conversation there, I would imagine.
I would imagine that too. I think another thing to note is that for some of these European leaders, the sense is that they already are contributing quite a bit. When the Trump administration says that they're not pulling their weight in terms of defense spending, that doesn't always account for some of the other forms of aid that these European countries are providing for Ukraine in efforts to resolve or find a conflict for the war. And so oftentimes, that message might not necessarily resonate with Europeans. And it's definitely something that was under consideration and perhaps one of the sticking points between the Trump administration and the delegation from the U.S. and the rest of the world leaders.
And Tom, to Stephanie's point, several of the European countries closest to Ukraine would say, Mr. President Trump, whether you think we are providing large enough checks for military or economic aid, we have absorbed hundreds of thousands of refugees from that war and done so at our cost and our accommodation.
Absolutely. If you talk with the European diplomats throughout this, I mean, we're going on 3 years of this. Certainly it was not ended in the first 24 hours of this administration. That they
one of the long-running campaign promises, if you remember. First day, 24 hours. I can do this. I can end this right away. Not happening.
Is that they are the physical buffer. And I remember talking with a few diplomats a couple of years ago about this, and questions about China and Taiwan, because we have to be positioned in all things, right, as a global superpower. And they said, if you want to deal with that, first you have to deal with, if you want Europe's support in these matters, first you have to deal with Ukraine, because for that reason, we are absorbing this hit. So again, this talk about Poland, putting forces in, all right, to bolster potentially against Ukraine, again.
There are lots of ways to support, lots of ways to assist. Perhaps the Trump administration's not sifting all of them to the European satisfaction. Tom Lumbiaco right here at the table with me. Stephanie Lai in Munich, thank you very much. Political showdown, well, it might be brewing in Minnesota. Coming up, what Senator Tina Smith's decision to retire might mean for the Senate map in 2026. That's next. You're watching America Decides.
This decision is not political. It is entirely personal. But it's not lost on me that our country is in need of strong progressive leadership right now, maybe more than ever.
Welcome back. That was Minnesota Democratic Senator Tina Smith announcing she's not going to run for re-election in 2026. That, of course, leaves her Senate seat open for next year's midterm. Now, Republicans have not won a Minnesota Senate race since 2002. President Trump lost the state to Kamala Harris by 4 points in the last election, the closest margin in 8 years. CBS News political reporter Hunter Woodall joins us now to handicap, at this very early stage, this open seat race. What do we know?
Major, this was kind of speculated for a while in Minnesota political circles that Senator Tina Smith wouldn't run again. Minnesota Democrats have a deep bench. There's a lot of ambitious Democrats who could run for this seat. Minnesota Republicans, however, there's been a lot of issues in the state party over the years. They've struggled to organize. So this is a prime pickup opportunity for Republicans if they had a well-organized machine in the state. They don't really have that right now.
What about Governor Tim Walz?
It's very interesting. I contacted a source close to the governor yesterday. He said, hey, he hasn't ruled it out yet. He may also run for a third term as governor, which is something he can do in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm. And is there a sense that any other prominent names, Ilhan Omar, for example, someone that Republicans talk about almost universally negatively, might be interested in this race?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. I mean, Representative Omar's congressional campaign sent out a fundraising email today saying, the headline was, what do you think? Should Ilhan run for the Senate? That's something that Republicans, they would love in Minnesota to see Representative Omar run for the Senate seat. They see her as somebody they think they could beat in the general election. Ilhan Omar, though, she has, she can fundraise. She's a well-known national name. And it would be an interesting dynamic in that race. Minnesota Democrats, though, have a lot of other options in this race at this point.
There's a name I've heard, Peggy Flanagan.
Yes, she put on social media very quickly after Senator Smith.
And she is what currently?
She's the lieutenant governor of Minnesota. She said, I intend to run. That's a well-known name in the state. She's well-respected.
Hasn't filed the paperwork yet, but making every social media suggestion she's going to get in.
Exactly. And there's a little bit of that awkwardness, though. Governor Walz saying, hey, I haven't ruled this out. His lieutenant governor saying, hey, I plan to do this.
Right. How about neighboring Michigan? Gary Peters not running for re-election, another Democrat basically taking themselves out of the Derby in 2026?
Michigan is a much dicier proposition for Democrats. You go back and look at it, no Republican has won a Michigan Senate seat since 1994, but they've had some close calls. Obviously, 2024, very close Senate race. 2020, Gary Peters, very close Senate race. So Republicans see this as, hey, with a good recruit in a cycle where they've really made some gains in past cycles, this could be in play for them. Michigan Democrats are really going to have to play this one closely.
And look, overall, Democrats feel on their back heels. You can sense that in Washington. Republicans feel ascendant. And so right now the Republicans are talking a big game. Basically everything is in play.
Well, exactly. And especially, in Michigan, they had this 2020 race that was so close. It was John James that ran. He's now a U.S. congressman. He's a U.S. rep. He's continued in political circles. So
build his name ID.
Exactly. So Michigan Republicans, they have an opportunity here. And especially looking at how close things have been, how President Donald Trump has fared in the state, they have some momentum there that could be noticeable and is worrying Democrats.
Covering it all for us, Hunter Woodall. Thank you very much. That does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report starts right now.